Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead.
It chants death to America, death to Israel, and it delivers death to its own people.
The US-Israeli war of aggression against Iran is the central global story right now. It is being reported around the clock in global media, with news of mounting casualties and escalation dominating the headlines. But is it simply a campaign against nuclear deterrence, as it claims, or is it the latest chapter of a longer story shaped as much by regime change ambitions as by a deeper pursuit of control over the Middle East political order, energy systems, and strategic resources? And why has a conflict that began with airstrikes over Tehran already escalated into a broader air and missile war across the Gulf, with pressure on the Strait of Hormuz now destabilizing the global energy system?
Operation Rising Line is designed to remove the existential threats posed by the Ayatollah regime, the regime that has waged war against America and Israel and the people of Iran for 47 years.
In the early 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes across Iran under what Washington called Operation Epic Fury.
Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it.
Claiming to target nuclear facilities, missile infrastructure, and senior command networks. But the pattern of strikes quickly extended beyond those categories, killing Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and relentlessly hitting civilian areas across Tehran, including residential districts and a girls' school. Across the first phase of the war, more than 1,000 civilians were reported killed, including at least 180 children, with thousands more injured. The most severe single incident came in Minab, in Iran's Hormozgan province, where a strike hit the Shajar-e-Tayyiba elementary school during class hours, killing well over 150 children, most between the ages of 7 and 12. This is likely the largest number of child casualties in a single US military attack since the My Lai massacre in Vietnam in 1968. But the miserable fact that this doesn't shock the conscience of a state that has allowed, in fact, even facilitated the genocide in Palestine for years now shows that such outcomes are no longer seen as exceptional, but rather expected. The timing and scale of the operation suggest something more deliberate. Negotiations with Iran had not collapsed. They were rather overtaken by a miscalculated war that has now expanded far beyond its initial scope, where the trajectory wasn't really anticipated by the Trump administration. This pattern is not just operational. In fact, it reflects how modern targeting works. The United States has increasingly relied on AI-assisted systems to process intelligence at scale, compressing the time taken for decisions into mere seconds, or rather, instantaneously. But such speed has consequences. When targeting cycles shrink, the margin for error narrows, and civilian spaces become statistically more vulnerable. To understand why Iran interprets these strikes not as limited deterrent, but as existential pressure, you have to go back not just to 1953, but to what followed it. When the United States and Britain orchestrated Operation Ajax and removed Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, it was not just a regime change, it established a pattern that control over Iran's political direction could be externally shaped when strategic interests, especially regarding oil trade, were at stake. That pattern didn't end with the Shah. It re-emerged through sanction regimes, covert operations, and repeated threats of military action. Even Iran's missile doctrine is shaped by this history as well. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, Iranian cities were repeatedly hit by Iraqi missiles while Western powers largely backed Baghdad. This made Iran realize that its survival and military might depends not alone on air power, which it in fact lacks, but rather on missiles that can be hidden in vast underground tunnels known as Iran's missile cities, dispersed and launched quickly. What began as imported Scud variants evolved into systems like Fateh and Sejil, not just weapons, but a strategy of endurance. Within days of strikes, the conflict expanded beyond Iran's territory, spilling into the Gulf as well. Israeli attacks on fuel depots, ports, power stations, transportation corridors, and logistics facilities around Tehran ignited petroleum fires across the capital, sending thick smoke over the multiple districts and prompting warnings of contaminated rainfall carrying toxic pollutants from burning oil infrastructure. But this was not merely about environmental damage, it was about capacity. Weakening Iran's economy limits its ability to sustain both domestic stability and regional alliances in Lebanon, Syria, etc., that are also now vulnerable to Israeli influence. Iran's response followed a different logic, one rooted in its historical constraints. Instead of direct confrontation, it expanded the battlefield horizontally, meaning ballistic and cruise missiles and armed drones were launched toward the Gulf countries hosting the United States military facilities, i.e., Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. This approach is not new. It reflects a doctrine developed over decades that if you cannot match your adversary's military strength, you can threaten the infrastructure that sustains the global economy as a pressure for leverage. At the center of this strategy lies the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through it. Iran does not need to close it. It only needs to make it uncertain. Strikes near shipping lanes, attacks on energy infrastructure, and temporary shutdowns like the UAE's Ruwais refinery were enough to push oil prices above $100 and force shipping companies to reroute. The war, in effect, moved from territory into the global economy. For the United States and Israel, the campaign relies on a familiar assumption that air power can produce strategic outcomes. Precision strikes, bunker-busting munitions, and real-time intelligence can degrade infrastructure and eliminate leadership targets. But this assumption has been tested before. From Vietnam to Iraq, air power has constantly struggled when objectives are unclear or expand beyond limited goals. The current campaign reflects the same tension. If the objective is to degrade Iran's missile capability, then success is measurable. But if the objective is regime collapse, the strategy becomes far less coherent. Because unlike what most presume, Iran's system is not as centralized in a way that allows for quick decapitation. Its missile forces are mobile, its infrastructure buried, and its command structure designed for redundancy. And even after sustained strikes, launches continue. That is not a failure of execution, it is a reflection of design. However, what's consistent and most troublesome is the humanitarian cost that is accelerating day by day. More than 880,000 people have been displaced in the first phase of the war. This raises not only moral questions, but legal ones as well. International humanitarian law requires distinction between military and civilian targets, and proportionality in the use of that force. Yet, repeated strikes on civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, residential areas, etc., suggest that these principles are under strain in practice. And this isn't exclusive to one side, but the scale, the precision, and technological capacity of United States and Israeli forces mean that capacity and responsibility are different. Iranian military capacity nor missiles can reach the American soil, but US-backed Israel has established enough arsenal strength to harm Palestinians, Iranians, Lebanon, and Syrians alike. Beneath the current conflict lies a deeper risk. Iran remains short of a nuclear weapon, but the war may shift its calculations. Historically, states under existential threat accelerate deterrence strategies. At the same time, Iran's long-standing objective, as it proclaims, remains that of preventing Iran from reaching nuclear capability. This creates a cycle. Pressure leads to acceleration. Acceleration leads to further pressure. The risk is not immediate nuclear war, but a steady movement toward it. For now, the conflict remains contained but unstable. Three trajectories are visible. First is containment, a prolonged campaign of infrastructure strikes, cyber operations, and proxy warfare without direct invasion. Second is regional escalation, drawing Hezbollah, Gulf states, and potentially direct US ground operations into the conflict. But thirdly, and most dangerously, is strategic escalation, where nuclear deterrence enters the equation. What this war ultimately reveals is not just a contest of weapons, but of historical trajectories. The United States and Israel are applying a model of technological dominance shaped by air power and precision. Iran is applying a model shaped by decades of vulnerability, dispersion, endurance, and indirect pressure. Neither model has yet produced a decisive outcome. And until one does, the war is likely to continue, not as a single event, but as an expanding system shaped as much by its past as by its present.